We are getting our first look at new images of the object designated 3i Atlas, and the data coming in is showing a dramatic and unexpected change. What was thought to be a simple fading object is now revealing a level of structure that is forcing a complete re-evaluation of its behaviour. The situation is developing rapidly as observatories, both on the ground and in space, are confirming these new features. We begin with an image that, on its own, is already raising questions. This first critical piece of data was captured by observer Tony Scarato, operating from a ground-based observatory in Italy. The subject of this observation is, of course, the object 3i Atlas, which is currently on its inbound trajectory, continuing its steady approach toward what we call perigee, its closest point to Earth. At first glance, the image appears to show something familiar, something we might expect from a comet-like object. We see a very bright central source, a pinpoint of light that represents the core concentration of mass. Surrounding this bright point is a broad hazy glow, what astronomers refer to as a coma, and extending away from this central region is a tail, a fainter streak of light stretching out at a very clear, very defined angle. This is the classic picture, the textbook image. However, a closer and more critical analysis of this initial photograph begins to unravel that simple narrative. The details are where the story truly lies. The coma, that surrounding glow, is surprisingly large and remarkably well formed. It isn't a chaotic, diffuse cloud of gas and dust that is simply expanding outwards in all directions. Instead, it has a definite shape and boundary. The brightness within this coma is also highly concentrated around the central source, you'd see. It is not smeared out or evenly distributed, which suggests that whatever process is generating this glow is still highly active and focused. Furthermore, the tail is a significant feature. It extends for several arc minutes across the sky, a substantial length from our perspective. But more importantly, it holds its direction with incredible consistency. It doesn't fan out or disperse into a wider, less defined shape as it gets further from the core. It remains a coherent linear feature. This leads us to the core conclusion from this single ground-based image, a conclusion that stands in direct opposition to our recent expectations for 3i Atlas. This is not a fading object. This is not a body that is slowly breaking apart and losing its energy. On the contrary, this is an object that remains profoundly structured. It is maintaining its integrity, and perhaps even developing new, more complex features. The significance of this cannot be overstated. At its current distance from the Sun and its specific geometry relative to Earth, our models would predict that an object like this should be softening. Its features should become blurrier, more diffuse, and less defined as material expands and the influence of solar radiation becomes more uniform. Instead, we are seeing the opposite. The features of 3i Atlas appear to be sharpening, becoming more defined and more organized. This single observation from Tony Scarato is the first piece of evidence that something about our understanding of this object is fundamentally wrong, or at the very least incomplete. This image is a warning shot telling us to pay much closer attention, because the story of 3i Atlas is about to change dramatically. Now, we must stay with this initial dataset for a moment longer, because what happens next is where this situation report escalates into a true breaking news event. We are not looking at a different telescope. We are not looking at an image taken on a different night. We are looking at the very same raw data collected by Tony Scarato. The only difference is what happens when that data is subjected to advanced enhancement processing. This is a common technique in astronomy, where computer algorithms are used to pull out faint details from an image, revealing structures that are too subtle for the human eye to see in the raw photograph. It is a way of turning up the volume on the data to listen for the quietest signals hidden within the noise. When this processing is applied to the image of 3i Atlas, something astonishing happens. A much, much larger structure snaps into view with startling clarity. It is not a subtle feature. It is a massive, undeniable presence that fundamentally redefines the object. What we are seeing is a long, linear feature pointing directly away from the Sun, what astronomers call an anti-solar feature. This is not just a tail, it is a colossal plume of material. Our initial calculations based on the image scale suggest this structure extends for at least 250,000 kilometers away from the central region of 3i Atlas. Let's put that number into perspective. 250,000 kilometers is an immense distance. It is more than 6 times the circumference of the Earth. It is roughly 2/3 of the distance from our planet to the Moon. To find a structure of this magnitude, this organized and this vast, connected to an object like 3I Atlas, is completely unexpected. It is crucial to verify that what we are seeing is real, and not some kind of digital illusion. We can confirm that this is not a subtle edge effect from the way the image was framed. It is not a result of background noise or stray light contaminating the sensor. We know this because the feature remains stable and consistent even when the processing parameters are changed. If it were an artifact, it would likely flicker, change shape, or disappear in Sharpening as the enhancement algorithms were adjusted. But it doesn't. The orientation of this massive plume stays consistent. Its structure remains clearly and physically attached to the central bright core. Its sheer scale becomes impossible to ignore. This is the moment where our entire perception of 3I Atlas shifts. It is no longer just a point of light with a bit of fuzz around it. It is no longer just a passive rock tumbling through space. With the revelation of this 250,000 kilometer long structure, 3I Atlas begins behaving like a complex system. It now has a clear directionality. It has an organized, large-scale structure that is being actively maintained by some underlying physical process. The question is no longer whether the object is interesting, but what powerful force could be creating and sustaining a feature of this incredible size and coherence. This enhanced image transforms the mystery from a simple question of brightness to a profound puzzle of physics and structure. To be certain that what we are seeing is a genuine feature of the object and not an anomaly confined to a single observation, we must seek confirmation from an independent source. We now move our focus away from ground-based telescopes entirely and turn to an asset in orbit around our planet. This next piece of data comes from NEOST, which stands for the Near-Earth Object Surveillance Telescope. This is a space-based observatory, a telescope orbiting high above the Earth. This provides us with a completely different vantage point and a number of critical advantages for observation. NEOST uses different optics, a different camera, and a different detection system than the telescope used by Tony Scarato. Crucially, it is positioned in space, meaning its view is completely free from the blurring and distorting effects of Earth's atmosphere. There is no atmospheric turbulence, no light pollution, and no weather to interfere with the clarity of the image. It is a pristine, unfiltered view. What makes this next piece of information so powerful is what NEOST reveals. Despite the completely different location, technology, and environment, the Space Telescope confirms the exact same core behavior that was observed from the ground. The data from NEOST shows that the central region of 3I Atlas remains incredibly compact and bright. The surrounding glow, the coma, is once again shown to be asymmetric, not a perfect circle, but a shape that is being pushed and molded by an external force. And most importantly, the overall orientation of the object and its features in the NEOST images perfectly matches what ground-based observers were already seeing. The direction of the elongation, the primary axis of the object's activity, is identical. The significance of this multi-system agreement cannot be overstated. This is the gold standard in scientific verification. When a space-based observatory sees the exact same thing as a ground-based observatory, it systematically rules out a whole host of potential errors. We can now say with a high degree of confidence that the structure is not caused by local seeing conditions, which are the atmospheric distortions that can affect telescopes on Earth. We can rule out tracking errors, where a telescope might not be perfectly following the object's motion across the sky, potentially smearing the image, and we can definitively rule out processing artifacts unique to one person's software or technique. This is no longer a story about one telescope catching something odd or one observer finding a strange anomaly. This is now a verified, corroborated phenomenon. We have multiple independent observation systems located in fundamentally different environments, one on the ground looking up through the atmosphere and one in the vacuum of space looking out, and they are all pointing to the exact same conclusion. They are all seeing the same structure. This tells us something profound about the nature of 3I Atlas itself. Whatever force is shaping this object right now, it is persistent, it is powerful, and its effects are not dependent on how or where we look at it. The structure is real. It is an intrinsic part of the object's current state. The evidence is now mounting that 3I Atlas is undergoing a significant and highly structured event, and we are fortunate enough to have multiple assets trained on it as it unfolds. With the structure now confirmed by independent ground and space-based systems, we can deploy more advanced analytical techniques to understand its geometry in greater detail. Look closely at this next frame we are bringing up. This is not a conventional color or black and white image. This is what is known as a contour plot, and it has been generated directly from the NeoSat data. The purpose of a contour plot is to strip away all the information about color and brightness and reduce the image to its purest form, its structure. You can think of it like a topographical map of a mountain range, where each line represents a specific elevation. In this case, each line represents a specific level of brightness. By connecting all the points of equal intensity, we can see the underlying shape of the object, free from any distracting visual noise. What this contour plot reveals is critically important. The first and most obvious revelation is that the brightness distribution around 3 Atlas is not symmetric. The contour lines do not form a series of neat concentric circles, which is what we would expect if material were expanding evenly from the central body like a perfect spherical cloud. That is not what is happening here. Instead, the intensity contours are clearly elongated. They stretch out in a specific direction, pointing towards the sun, forming a defined directional feature. This is a direct contradiction to the model of simple, uniform dispersal. An even release of gas and dust should produce a smooth, rounded envelope of material. The sharp, directional nature of these contours suggests a much more focused and organized process is at work. This analysis provides powerful confirmation of the structure's reality. What we are observing is a coherent feature that is physically anchored to the central region of 3i Atlas. It maintains its shape across multiple independent contour levels. This is a crucial detail. We are not just seeing a single bright pixel or a random alignment of a few bright spots that could be dismissed as instrumental noise. We are seeing a layered signal, a consistent shape that is repeated across different brightness thresholds. Each contour line represents a different level of intensity, and the fact that the elongated structure persists through all of them means it is a deep and robust feature of the object. In other words, this structure is so prominent that it survives even the most aggressive forms of data processing. Its ability to hold its shape under this level of intense analytical scrutiny is the ultimate proof that it is not noise, and it is not an artifact of the software. It is a real physical structure with a clear orientation and a stable geometry. When you combine this highly technical contour analysis with the more intuitive optical images we saw earlier from the ground, the complete picture begins to sharpen into focus with undeniable clarity. We are no longer looking at isolated pieces of a puzzle. We are seeing different views of the same phenomenon, and they are all telling us the exact same story. We have different telescopes operated by different people using different techniques from different locations, one on the ground, one in space, and that they're all converging on the exact same geometry. This is the moment of synthesis, where all the streams of evidence flow together to form a single unified picture of what is happening to 3i Atlas. Let's put these pieces together directly. What Tony Scarato captured from the ground and what NeoSat recorded from orbit are not separate stories. They are not contradictory accounts. They are in fact two complementary views of the very same structure, seen from different distances, with entirely different instruments, and processed in completely different ways. Yet the core truth remains the same across all of them. The direction of the primary feature lines up perfectly between the observations. The underlying geometry holds true, whether you are looking at a long-exposure photograph or a computer-generated contour map. The immense scale of the feature does not collapse or shrink under scrutiny. It remains consistent. Let's perform a direct comparison. From the ground-based view, the enhanced image from Tony Scarato shows us the vast extended structure stretching deep into the anti-solar direction, a plume of material reaching a staggering 250,000 kilometers into space. From the space-based view, the contour analysis of the NeoSat data pulls out the very same feature. It confirms that this structure is aligned, it is coherent, and it is firmly anchored to a compact, active central region. The agreement is precise and unambiguous. This level of corroboration is what every scientist hopes for. It is the definitive sign that you are on the right track. The fact that aggressive digital filtering, abstract contour mapping, and raw optical imaging all agree on the same fundamental structure means we are no longer in the realm of speculation about processing artifacts or instrumental glitches. We can now state with a very high level of confidence that we are looking at a real, persistent structure. This is something that survives changes in our viewpoint. It survives changes in our observational techniques, and critically, it appears to be staying locked in the same orientation over time. While this convergence of evidence doesn't yet tell us what this structure is or what is causing it, it does provide an unshakable foundation for the next stage of our investigation. It tells us this: whatever is shaping through our atlas right now is active, it is directional, and it is still evolving before our very eyes. So where does this leave us? The synthesis of all available data allows us to define the current state of 3i Atlas with a newfound clarity. First, the object is active. It is not a dormant piece of rock. It is actively shedding material and generating a visible coma and tail system on a massive scale. Second, it is directional. The activity is not random or chaotic. It is focused and organized into a coherent structure with a clear orientation in space. Third, and perhaps most excitingly, it is still evolving. The appearance of this structure is a relatively new development, indicating that we are witnessing a dynamic process in real time. This fundamentally shifts the entire focus of our inquiry. The question is no longer whether something significant has changed with 3i Atlas. The data is now overwhelming on that point. The new question, the central mystery we must now confront is, what mechanism is responsible for this change? What physical process can produce this kind of remarkable stability on such a vast scale, especially as the object is getting closer to the Sun and Earth? Explaining how a structure stretching for 250,000 kilometers can maintain its coherence this close to perigee is a profound challenge to our current models of cometry and asteroidal behavior. Fortunately, we have a critical observational milestone rapidly approaching. The object 3i Atlas is scheduled to make its closest approach to Earth on December 19th. This upcoming event will be a crucial test. As the object flies past our planet, we will have an unparalleled opportunity to observe it with our most powerful instruments. This close pass will reveal whether the structure we are now seeing holds together, whether it begins to fade and disperse, or whether it transforms yet again into something new and even more unexpected. The data we collect around December 19th will be the key to unlocking this mystery. This leads us to the core debate that is now taking shape within the scientific community, centered on two potential explanations for what we are observing. The first hypothesis is that we are witnessing a temporary phase. This idea suggests that the structure is being driven by rapidly changing solar conditions. Perhaps 3i Atlas has rotated in such a way that a previously dormant, volatile-rich area on its surface is now exposed to direct sunlight, causing a sudden and focused outburst of gas and dust. If this is the case, we might expect the structure to be short-lived, fading away as the volatile materials are depleted or as the object rotates again. The second hypothesis, however, points to something far more profound. This second line of thinking suggests that we are not seeing a temporary surface-level event, but rather a deeper, more persistent process that is revealing itself as the object passes through the intense environment of the inner solar system. This could involve internal stresses causing the object to fracture in an organized way, or perhaps it relates to a more exotic physical mechanism that we have not yet fully understood. If this second hypothesis is correct, the structure might not fade after perigee. It could persist or even continue to evolve, telling us that 3i Atlas is fundamentally different from a typical comet or asteroid. This is the central question we are faced with today as we analyze these incredible new images. Are we simply watching a temporary outburst, a fleeting moment of activity driven by the Sun? Or are we getting our first glimpse of a deeper, more persistent, and perhaps more significant process that is intrinsic to the nature of 3i Atlas itself? The answer to that question remains unknown, but the data is beginning to point towards a truly fascinating scenario. What we need now are more observations, more analysis, and more eyes on this developing situation. This is where the global community of both professional and amateur astronomers becomes so vital. We are asking everyone with a telescope pointed towards the sky to share their data. We are asking you, the public, to engage with this mystery. What do you think today's new images are telling us? What is your take on the massive structure that has now been confirmed by multiple observatories? We encourage you to drop your take in the comments. Every perspective is valuable as we try to piece together this puzzle. The story of 3i Atlas is being written day by day, and the next chapter is about to begin. If you want to follow this object as it evolves, as it makes its closest approach to our planet, make sure you're subscribed to this channel for the latest updates. We will be bringing you new data and analysis the moment it becomes available. We also urge you to share this update with anyone else who has been tracking this object. The more people who are aware of these new developments, the more complete our understanding will become. The universe has presented us with a beautiful and profound mystery. The journey to solve it has just begun. Stay curious. Stay curious. The stakes of this investigation are incredibly high. If the massive 250,000 kilometre structure is just a temporary outburst, it will still be a spectacular event, but one that fits within our existing models. However, if this structure holds together past its December 19th flyby, it would suggest something far more significant. It could mean 3I Atlas is not a typical comet at all, but represents a new class of object with internal processes we don't yet understand.